Welcome to this session, Should Museums Sweat Their Assets? My name's Alistair Brown, I'm the Policy Officer at the Museums Association, and I'll introduce you in a moment to our wonderful panel. But I thought I might begin the discussion today just with a bit of scene setting. Many of you will know that earlier this week, the Museums Review was published by DCMS, my already dog-eared copy I have with me today. And I was at the launch of the review earlier this week, and Neil Mendoza, who's speaking later at the conference, and John Glenn, the Minister for Arts and Heritage, both spoke at the launch of the review, and they both spoke about all of the wonderful things that museums can and do, delivering wonderful public goods around social engagement, learning, education, and around health and well-being, around soft power. But they also spoke at quite considerable length, and the review includes quite a lot on museum funding and museum sustainability. And increasingly, we're hearing from government the need for museums to be more self-sustaining, less reliant on public subsidy. And the Minister's comments really reflect the reality of where we are, that public funding for core museum costs especially is diminishing, and more than ever museums, and not just the independent museums who are perhaps more used to operating in that model, are expected to really cover more of their own costs. And this is going beyond now the traditional shop and cafe model. Museums are doing more things, being expected to be more entrepreneurial. And so today we're going to hear from our expert panel about some of the things that they've been doing to generate more of their own income and to adapt to some of the challenges that their museums are facing financially. But we're also going to talk a bit about where the limits are in terms of museums becoming more like cultural enterprises. Are there things that are actually beyond the pale for museums to do? Are there things that they shouldn't be doing? The Code of Ethics, of course, sets limits around issues like financially motivated disposal, but are there other issues where museums should perhaps be less inclined to act like businesses and more as public organizations? To discuss all this and more, I'm joined by our three guests today. I have on my left Eleanor Harris, who's the Director of Visitor Experiences and Enterprise at Royal Museums Greenwich. I have Neil Curtis, the head of the University of Aberdeen Museums, and also a member of the MA's Ethics Committee. And on my far right, I have Steve Miller, who's the Director of Norfolk Museum Service. And the way that we're going to run this session today, I've asked each of the three speakers to give us a short presentation to talk a little bit about what their museums are doing around income generation and sweating their assets. And then we'll follow up with a bit of a discussion and some Q&As at the end. And we're going to start off with Eleanor from Royal Museums Greenwich.
Hello, everyone. We have 4 museums. 2 of them are really sort of heritage attractions, the Royal Observatory and Cutty Sark. The National Maritime Museum, which is a free entry national museum, and the Queen's House, which is a beautiful Grade 1 listed building with a wonderful collection of art inside. I think the Mendoza report, which was published a couple of days ago, has been very interesting. There's quite a strong steer in there saying that museums do need to increase and diversify their income. What's also quite clear in the report is that it's unlikely that we'll see this general trend of our funding going down and down, reversing. I personally am a real Brexit pessimist and imagine a shrunken economy in the future, and can see that trying to persuade governments to put more and more money into the cultural sectors are going to become more problematic when they're going to need to protect NHS, education, etc. So I think potentially we face a much tougher time ahead. At Royal Museums Greenwich, we're now in a situation where our income from our grant and aid is smaller than our wage bill. In fact, the cost to what I call open the doors, and by that I mean our staff, our utilities, our rent and our rates and our basic maintenance, are now 30% more, those costs are 30% more than our grant and aid. So we obviously have quite a gap there to fill just to be open. So the sort of title of this presentation about should we sweat our assets, well, certainly from our point of view, that's not a should, it's an absolute necessity. And I think the other thing we've experienced is that whilst there is perhaps plenty of funding around from the HLF, from trusts and foundations for really exciting capital projects, what's impossible to get funded externally is some of the really mundane things that we actually desperately need to do, like replace our lifts or deal with the peeling paint or the roof that leaks. And so we have to actually, generate quite a significant amount of commercial income just to kind of exist. I think we are at a crossroads as a sector, and I think the crossroads we face are, do we kind of really go for it and really sweat our assets and attempt to generate more and more income in order that we can do more and more? Or do we face the cuts by cutting what we do? Now, I know where I stand on the fence, and I would much rather work for an organisation that does both together, because I think a great museum can do both, because the more income we generate, the more that we can do in terms of our programming, in terms of showcasing our collections, in terms of opening new galleries and doing wonderful work. And I'm really proud to work for somewhere where we are ambitious, and we've got an exciting series of things happening over the next 12 months and beyond, but they all do require money. So that's, I suppose, where my job comes in. So I joined Royal Museums Greenwich in January. I come from quite an unusual background for my role. I've come from a commercial attraction background, so I perhaps approach things slightly differently. And we've had a really good year, and so far our income is actually, commercial income is actually up by 20%. The things that we've done so far, none of them are kind of big, radical, hugely innovative things, but I thought I'd just share them with you because sometimes just sorting out your kind of bread and butter business can make a real impact. So one of the things we did, and I'll show you a quick picture, is we moved our shops a few months ago. And before we did this, in the National Maritime Museum, only 40% of our visitors actually found our shop. Lovely range inside, but it was hidden away in an old gallery. We made a really simple change, and this does very much follow the model of a commercial attraction. You go to a Merlin attraction, you go to Disney, you will see all the retail very much near the kind of entrance and exit space. So we have two entrances to the National Maritime Museum, and we moved our shops to be right next to the entrances. A kind of obvious thing to do. It was a very low-cost thing to do. We hardly had to buy any new additional units, and we've seen a 50% increase in our spend per visitor, which is really, really pleasing. We plan next year, when we are opening 4 new galleries, to further expand our retail range and our shops to hopefully deliver even more. We've also done more in terms of product ranges. We're always trying to improve them. I'm going to show you just a very small example. One of our greatest assets isn't actually in our collection, it's the fact that the Royal Observatory is located on the site of the Prime Meridian line. In fact, that's why the observatory is there, for anyone who knows all the history. And this is a very touristic range aimed at all the foreign visitors who want to stand on the line and take their selfie. And it's one of our best sellers. It generates something like 15% of all our retail range. We just tweaked and improved it this year, and we've seen a massive increase in the retail range, in terms of the income from that one particular thing. And as we go through on all our ranges, we're always trying to improve them. But this is kind of the basics of really running any retail business. We also introduced a new catering contract this year. We used to have 3 different caterers. We're now working on a single contract, and that simple change has resulted in more than 100% increase in our earnings from catering. And the new caterer is also going to make a significant investment, which is happening during our winter period, when we'll have to close the cafe, our main cafe, for a period of time, and we'll have a sort of dramatic improvement into our cafe. So we should hope to see some big improvements next financial year too. We've just undertaken a pricing review. It's the first time we've done that for a number of years. And we've made a number of changes to our prices. We've tweaked them here and there, and this has resulted in improved ticket yields. So that means every extra person coming through the door on our paid sites, we earn more income from them. We've made quite a big change to our marketing. Historically, the vast majority of our marketing spend was focused on our exhibition programme, although this only represents 4% of our visitors to our museums. This year, we did a big campaign focused on the overseas market. And it had some really pleasing results. We basically promoted our core offer, promoted our core sites. There's obviously a massive overseas market in London. And this has been really successful. We've really grown our overseas visitors this year, and overall visitor numbers have been up by 14% at our paid sites. And because they're paid sites, that's money on the door, which has contributed nearly an extra £1 million in our coffers. One of the things I'm quite proud of is our approach to weddings at the Queen's House. The Queen's House, for those of you who know, is the most beautiful Grade 1 listed building. Inside there is an incredible collection of art. It's at free access for people to come in. And it underwent an extensive refurbishment and reopened just over a year ago, October last year. It's a really wonderful place to visit. I recommend it. Our income from the general public is really, really tiny. We have a tiny little shop. At the moment, we barely sell anything. We don't charge entry, and our donation box, money in the donation boxes is disappointing. So the real earner for us at the Queen's House is weddings. Now, in the past, a couple of years ago, whenever we did a wedding, we'd actually close the house, which of course meant that the members of the public couldn't come in. It was really important to us as an organisation to solve this. And when we reopened, we took the decision that we would find a way that when we've got a wedding taking place, and this is where the weddings take place in our beautiful Great Hall, we'd find a way to keep the rest of the house open. And that's been really successful. We've actually had record days with more than 1,000 people coming through the doors, going into all of our art galleries that are all open during a wedding. But we're still managing to do a wedding. A wedding business earns us hundreds of thousands of pounds. So that's a great kind of combination. So I just wanted to talk about sort of the year ahead, and I think we're now looking at potentially a few more slightly more radical ideas. So I think I mentioned we're opening 4 new galleries next year, a whole new wing for the National Maritime Museum, which is going to be amazing. That opens in September, giving us a little plug for next year. What we've managed to incorporate into our plans is there was a space at the end of the galleries that used to be office space, which offers these very nice small rooms that have lovely views of the Old Royal Naval College and of our grounds. And we're going to be developing these rooms to become a new daytime meeting space. So I think it's a great combination of being able to do something commercial, which doesn't actually detract from the main core purpose of why we're there. We're also making some really nice improvements to the visitor experience at Cutty Sark. Cutty Sark's a paid site, and in order to choose what to do, we went out and did some market research with the people who aren't paying currently to come in to find out what might persuade them to come through the door instead. We call these our lookers, and these are people who are out in Cutty Sark Gardens, a lot of them taking a photo of the ship, but not coming in and experiencing the fantastic experience inside. The feedback we had was they would be really motivated to visit by experiences that kind of bring to life on board. So some of the things we'll be implementing will include climbing the rigging, which would be amazing to sort of experience life as a sailor. We started doing an experience where you can hoist the signal flags, things like scrubbing the decks, but also bringing to life the sort of sights and smells of being on board the ship. The other feedback we had was that some of the content at the moment is a little bit dumbed down for our cultural adult audience. So we're going to be introducing a really well-researched audio tour, which will be available in 10 languages. So that will meet the needs both of our cultural adult audience, but also our international visitors. Hopefully that will result in lots more visitors coming to Cutty Sark and some extra income. One thing we're doing next year, which is very much borrowed from the kind of commercial attraction sector, is introducing green screen photography. This is, when you stand and you get a unique photo. And this very much plays to our international audience who want their selfie on the Meridian line. And we know from experience at other attractions that this might bring an extra £500,000 of cash in for us. That's fantastic. Other things we're looking at trialling a beach in our grounds for next summer. Now, this isn't just a random idea. It actually fits with a really wonderful photography exhibition coming to the National Maritime Museum in March, which is called the Great British Seaside. So it's quite playful. We'll have our own beach. But of course, there's commercial opportunities there in terms of catering, and there might be some sort of fun pier-style rides that you can pay to do as well. It's also helped to hook in a potential sponsor. I can't mention who at this stage because conversations are still going on, but this sponsor is someone who sells products related to the beach, so they potentially now are a sponsor for our exhibition. We, like many museums, are debating the issue of whether we do a more proactive ask as people come through the door. I've been watching with interest at what's been happening at some of the other national museums in London. The Science Museum have really pioneered this, but there have been trials also taking place this summer at the British Museum, the Museum of London and the National Gallery. And this is really about just talking to people as they come in, welcoming them and asking if they'd like to give a donation. I've estimated that if we were to do this across our free sites, it's probably worth about £1 million for us. But I'm not sure we're ready. It's a big cultural shift. It would be a big change for our staff. I know at the Science Museum, they actually ended up recruiting a dedicated team to do this. You've got specific sales skills. So it's certainly a sort of live debate for us at the moment. We've been doing some innovative approaches to how we fund things at RMG. We've just built an amazing new collection and conservation centre, and much of the funding for this was a loan from the government, which we can borrow as a National Museum virtually at the Bank of England rate. And our payback on that is that we've been able to extricate ourselves from some expensive commercial rents we were paying before. We're now looking at that same approach to fund some kind of commercial projects. So if I want to do the daytime meeting space, if we want to look at new shops, we can build a business case and look at how we can return our investment on that. That means we don't have to go out and call on our reserves. We don't have to try and get funding, which we won't get from someone like HLF to build a new shop. So it's quite an innovative new way to do things. The last thing I wanted to just touch on is our Insight Astronomy Photographer of the Year show. And I think this is a wonderful example of that perfect balance that can be achieved between our sort of programming aspirations and also our commercial objectives. This is an absolutely amazing show. It's been going for 9 years now. It gets incredible coverage internationally in the media. But sadly, we've had nowhere to put it other than a very tiny, tiny little space at the Royal Observatory, which actually used to be a cloakroom. So we've taken a fairly bold decision to move the exhibition out of the Royal Observatory, which is its natural home, but unfortunately there's no space in there big enough to sort of display it adequately, put it into a proper large exhibition space in the National Maritime Museum and turn it into a paid show. So not only will this mean that people coming to see it can really experience those images as they should be experienced, but it also gives us the opportunity to earn income, both from ticket sales, but also from a special shop, because the product range can be fantastic. And also from our sponsor. We've luckily got a sponsor for this show who's very excited to renew and excited because of the bigger scale show that we're planning on doing. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Right, we'll move straight on to our next speaker, Neil Curtis from the University of Aberdeen.
Definitely feel slightly daunted. I don't claim expertise. I can claim some experience. I can't claim the size that you have there. We have a very, very different size of institution. The university collections are tremendously good. The National Audit of Museums in Scotland showed them coming out. If you massage the figures in the way I do, we come out as sort of number 4 with enough qualifications, but ask me afterwards if you really want. We're a recognised collection and so on. But what we really lack is a venue. We have exhibition spaces. There's a sort of unstaffed zoology museums, very small exhibition spaces. And we're in the process of merging with special collections, which will bring another gallery space, also brings very strange VAT restrictions on what we're allowed to do. But what I wanted to talk about was more my experience of a particular project that we're working through, which proportionately has had a huge impact on us. This is an exhibition titled, in translation, Pharaoh Living in Ancient Egypt. It's on just now. Go and visit it. Last few weeks in Rosenheim, just outside Munich. Opened in March, running through until mid-December. It's a partnership between, this is where I'm going to be fascinated. This thing seems really not very good at non-English words, and me not speaking German, I don't know where we'll go. It's the Lokschuppen Exhibition Centre in Rosenheim, which is a local authority exhibition centre, they give enough funding to put on a big blockbuster exhibition each year, which is then expected to cover all its costs. And the idea is that tourism and local industry benefits from that offer. So it doesn't need to make a profit. The logistics are done by an Austrian company, Museums Partner, which some people may have dealt with. They do touring exhibitions, they do museum logistics, couriering, storage and so on. The intellectual core of it, I think, comes from, this is what I want to see, Römer und Pellets Museum in Hildesheim. What's it going to say? Have I broken it? Thank you. Hildesheim, near Hanover. And what we actually found is our Egyptian collections are particularly good. They are the second largest in Scotland. But Egyptology isn't taught in Scottish universities. We don't have a display for it. And what we've actually found is most of our users, visitors, researchers are German. So it really wasn't surprised that it's German institutions we've been working with. So we have previously lent individual items, handfuls of objects to various institutions in Germany. But they were approached by the Rosenheim organization to host this big exhibition. And they said, well, we have a museum. We're not letting you have our best stuff for the entire year, but we know somebody who's got a collection but can't display it. So that's our brokerage happened. And we're now lending basically 40% of the objects on display are from Aberdeen, 40% from Hildesheim, and then the others are from other German institutions. So it's huge for us. I mean, last summer we had 8 staff. This summer we've been down to 4. We're actually building up again. We were handling 147 objects, and this ranges from tiny wee scarabs and so on, up to a mummy, a coffin, and an enormous limestone car door. So for us, it's a huge, huge project. It's had an awful lot of benefits, and this is where the sweating the assets comes in. I think there's definitely been quite a bit of sweat in doing this. Literally, we're on the first floor. Everything's got to be carried down. We have, obviously, all the normal loan agreements, so all the costs are borne by the borrower. But on top of that, we've been paid, I think it's confidentially secret, but stuff it. We got 25,000 euros, which, because of Brexit, this is the one bit of optimism for Brexit, we did really well out of this because the pound crashed after we agreed the figure. Now, that in some ways is not a lot. However, when you put it against our non-staff operational budget of 28,000, it's a huge impact, and that let us employ a conservation assistant to work on the material we were lending and other work, and we've subsequently been able to employ her in a permanent contract. There was a lot of conservation work carried out in kind from Hildesheim. The exhibition programme paid for conservation of papyrus, of limestone, and mummy coffin, and indeed a mummy as well, which was also CT scanned. We did have to put a bit of money to that, which we got from an anonymous donor, and I'm not telling you, through the University Development Trust. We've now appointed the curator in Hildesheim as an honorary research fellow in the university, so we carry on getting that expertise coming into us. So those are the sort of direct benefits, which I think have been substantial. We're now in the process of planning. I'm going back there next month, which is, I mean, my life has changed. I have never flown as much as I have this year. I even got a sort of, loyalty card for an airplane, which is unreal. Feels a bit bad sometimes. But because we're planning on turning it into a touring exhibition, which is programmed to go to Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria next year, and then Cincinnati the year after, and it's a 5-year program, maybe extending. Each year we'll get a payment, not the 25,000, less than that, but nonetheless. That will let us carry on doing things, and hopefully it's quite a nudge towards staff for us. We've had also little spin-offs. I mentioned we had the conservation, but we had a CT scan of the mummy, which has now led to a facial reconstruction, which we'd never been able to do. That inspired us to do some CAT scanning of a cat in Aberdeen. So we were working with the anatomy department and some technological centres as well to do that. We took advantage of a local software company who wanted a pilot, so we've got a little mini online exhibition of Egyptian stuff. But the real impact has actually been, if you're in Bavaria, University of Aberdeen is now a bit better known, but more to the point, in Aberdeen and in the university, our profile has hugely raised, because we're seen as bringing in a bit of income. We're seen as an opportunity for alumni receptions, for student recruitment. And it's actually the people I've been able to talk to within the institution, having this has, to my mind, been a bigger impact than the 25,000 that we got. But a lot more to talk about. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Neil. That's fascinating. And now we'll see if Steve can confound the stage text with any foreign or Norfolk words of his own.
I speak fluent Mancunian. No problems here. Norfolk Museum Service, if you don't know, it is a joint local authority service led by Norfolk County Council with support from 7 districts. We've been fortunate to receive Arts Council support since 2012 as a major partner museum, and from April next year we will be a national portfolio organisation. We've been equally grateful for long-term support from the Heritage Lottery Fund. Norfolk Museum Service runs and supports the museum development function through Share Museums East, and one of the interesting things which Share have been doing over the last 18 months or so is running the Shared Enterprise programme supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund, and that has been again about helping museums across the east of England go on their own journey of sweating their assets, generating more income, creating fundraising pots, etc., etc. So Norfolk Museum Service is made up of 10 museums, reasonably equally spread across the county. They have their own character and their own role within the wider museum service, and in total they generate about 400,000 plus visits per year. Since 2010, despite huge support and ongoing brilliant advocacy around with the local authorities, we have seen a reduction of more than 50% of our local authority core revenue grant. The current position we find ourselves in is that roughly 2/7 of our revenue funding is actually from local authority sources, and 5/7 comes from other sources. In terms of how we use our assets, both buildings and collections, the main focus at this moment in time is on Norwich Castle, which is our largest site in terms of numbers and in terms of scale of the operation. We've had very good news that we have support from the Heritage Lottery Fund, a Stage 1 pass for a £13.5 million redevelopment of the keep at Norwich Castle. And over the next few years, we hope to be recreating the Norman Royal Palace and also putting in place a British Museum partnership gallery of the medieval period. There are lots of very good reasons for doing that development, both in terms of learning and in terms of academic outcomes, but there is no doubt that one of the things we most need from that development is the commercial income which will come from a significant uplift in visitors, an extra 100,000 visits per annum, plus also the ability to improve and increase our conference and banqueting offer, including creating a rooftop bar with great views of the city of Norwich. So we're focusing on that. Meanwhile, across the other parts of the service, we are doing some of the things which I'm sure you are doing in your own services. In 2014, we had 5 of our 10 museums licensed for weddings, including Norwich Castle, which has now become the centre of the registry office function for the county and certainly for the city. In 2015 to 16, we had 3 weddings, and in 2016 to 17, we had 600. So Stuart Garner, our excellent operations manager from Norwich, is sitting up there. You can tell him, or you can ask him what the impact of going from sort of 0 to 600 in a year is like in terms of the operational impact. We're looking and modelling at a 14% uplift year on year, and it will be an exciting journey to go upon. Weddings are very, very important to us in both generating income, but also in actually creating new audiences. I've long ago stopped putting things in the box of commercial income or audience development or learning. I think it's too porous for that. So this photograph is Gressenhall. It's a beautiful farm, heritage farm and workhouse near Dereham. If you go over to Great Yarmouth, you can choose, if you so wish, to get married at Elizabethan House in the conspiracy room where the final signature was put on the death warrant of King Charles. And who can't argue that's not a great platform for a long and happy marriage? So if that is your thing, Elizabethan House is the place to go. And this incredibly warm and welcoming, come and get married here photograph is taken in the Toll House jail in Great Yarmouth. We licensed that more in hope than expectation of generating a significant income, but strangely enough, there's actually been a market for slightly more unusual ceremonies, including weddings, which I'd say are more on the sort of goth end of things. So running with the grain of the sites we think is important when you're looking at income generation. Now, staying with the slightly darker theme of how we generate money to make ends meet, this photograph is one of our paranormal events. Now, a question to you, and again it may come up in the Q&A afterwards, is that I think everybody has red lines, and this actually was one of mine, but as lo and behold you can see we've crossed it. It just was too good an offer to turn down, and the reason is it's too good an offer is actually the paranormal clubs who come are very good payers. The operational cost of actually doing a paranormal evening is quite modest. It's a single member of staff overnight. They come with flasks. They're very well behaved, and they leave the site in a beautiful condition for the school programme the next day. So I personally had a lot of problems with this. You may have problems yourself with that kind of concept. So moving from paranormal events, this is another exciting new venture for Norfolk Museum Service. We're working with a company called History Mystery, which does bespoke historical escape room games. And if you've not done escape room games before, and I certainly hadn't before this year, you're basically locked in a room with some chums for about an hour, and you have to solve some puzzles in a crystal maze kind of way, and then you can be let out of the room. Now, we've decided rather than being a letting kind of arrangement with History Mystery, we want to go into this hand in glove with them, and we've created a setup where we will actually use our museum sites, and we'll go into a 50-50 profit share with them. So we think it's about an equal kind of commitment in terms of the resources to make this thing work, and we're going to see how far we can take the endeavour. So a very new enterprise. Ask me in a few years how we've got on, but we think it could be very beneficial, both in terms of income generation, but also in terms of using the sites in quite an exciting way in terms of interpretation. Now, going from sites to collections, again, this is something that we completed this year. The photograph on the inset, the black and white photograph, is a plane. It was made by a Norwich firm called Bolton Paul, who some of you may know, and that plane was the world's first steel tube framed plane in the world. It went and was exhibited at the Paris Air Show in 1919, also the first plane, I believe, to use plastic in terms of the cockpit. The wings of that incredible first are now on permanent loan to Norwich's Aviation Academy. Now, again, we felt that was a good place for one of our superstar objects to go, because it's an inspiration, we hope, to some of the design engineers and students who will be going through that academy. It had to meet the same loan requirements as any of our other loans to other museums, but it is not to a museum. The commercial side of that came in because our design team actually received a fee for that, and it also helped us link in with the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership and some of our other major stakeholders like Norwich City Council and Norfolk County Council. So I would like to just finish off my presentation by just charting really the journey of a single member of staff, a curator of ours, Ruth Battersby-Tuck, who undertook the fantastic MA Transformers programme a couple of years ago. And what Ruth wanted to focus on through the Transformers programme was actually looking at her own area of expertise, the costume and textile collection in Norfolk, and actually how that could be put to harder work in terms of income generation and the development of new audiences. So again, that's the raw material. Our collections are mixed and varied. We have a wonderful collection of shoes, and there they all are on sort of semi-open storage. So I think Ruth was, again, looking at the options, looking at the ability to take those collections and make them work hard, generate income. So again, this is how Ruth took that forward. Ruth curated and delivered a show called Frayed, Textiles on the Edge, which was looking at how textiles can be incredibly important in terms of support for people with mental health problems. And she took the embroidered letters of Lorena Bulwer, who was incarcerated in the what was then known as the Lunatic Asylum in Great Yarmouth. And the embroidered letters have become a range of products, greeting cards, notelets, etc. So they supported the exhibition. They've now gone on to sort of permanent retail display and purchase in the shops. Ruth also then, through the support of Arts Council England, through a programme called Pin Money, started to look at how she could take some of those collections and actually work with designers today, students from the Norwich University of the Arts. There she is, Ruth, working with the university, prototyping new versions from the collections, the baby's bib, beautiful textile works. And then we've got into, again, still early days in terms of how much income we will create from this, but using the skills within the conservation team as well as our curatorial expertise, we've been creating a wedding dress packing service using the same basic techniques as you would for packing museum textiles in terms of a box. Wedding dress inspiration days, again, early days, but that can be where a bride-to-be and her family and friends can come to the museum, spend some time in the costume and textile department, drawing on dresses from perhaps the Edwardian period with a view to theming their wedding. So again, exciting, different and innovatory ways to use the collection. My final point, again, on Ruth's journey, we had an inquiry. I have to say we didn't solicit it, but we responded very positively to it. We had a local firm of architects who were doing some creation of some very high-end waterside flats in the city, and they wanted to actually put a little bit of Norwich into the developments, obviously for commercial gain. And we ended up taking from the Norwich shawl collection the beautiful paisley patterns on the Norwich shawl collection, and that pattern has been replicated in a cut steel balcony which forms the waterfront location overlooking the River Wensum. So again, very different, a little bit unusual. It may become something we do more and more. It may never happen again. In terms of, just to give you a feel for whether that was worth doing, it generated about £2,500 contribution into the coffers. So I will finish there and we can move to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Steve, and to our other speakers as well. I was reflecting on all of your presentations, and one of the things that leapt out at me is that actually, we probably shouldn't be calling this session "Should Museums Sweat Their Assets?" We should maybe be calling it "How Much Should Museums Sweat Their Assets?" There seems to be loads going on and lots more being planned, but there were also hints in there of some of the discussions that are being had behind the scenes. Certainly, Eleanor, you mentioned this idea around more proactive donations and some of the discussions that are ongoing there. Steve, you mentioned some of your doubts around paranormal activity stuff. So maybe if you could take us a little bit more behind the scenes into those kind of discussions about how you make those decisions, what you think are the right kind of commercial activities to be going into, and whether there are any things that you have chosen not to do.
I think it's fair to say that some of the things that we could do would require potentially quite a big cultural shift. And I think, in a sense, some commercial activity is really easy and straightforward, isn't it? You can put a cafe in, you can do some corporate events or weddings, you can do some, you can have a shop, and none of that sort of challenges the way that the museum is run. I think some of the big opportunities do potentially impact on visitor experience and stray into a sort of more attraction-y way of doing things, or just a very different approach. And that will require a cultural shift. And I think we are faced with a kind of hard reality of where we are financially. And I think actually we need to be more open with our colleagues across the museum, particularly our frontline colleagues, about, the reality of our financial position. I think we need to probably train our leaders to be more financially aware and understand, sort of get a little bit more business acumen, because we're not in a nice little cozy bubble, and this is where, some of the reality is heading. And I think it is challenging to potentially bring people on that journey, but as I sort of alluded to, I don't think any of us want to be in the position of having to cut things to face up to this, or to not fix the leaking roof. So I think we are going to have those discussions and debates, and I mean, it's obviously clear where I stand on that, but it's a journey, really.
Again, Norfolk Museum Service, I think it would be fair to say, has been on a journey for a very long time. We have done the expected, tried to get as much contribution as we can out of the cafe function, the retail function, brought in weddings. We now, as you can see, into the slightly more unusual end of things, and some of those things will fall flat on their face. Some of them will be hugely successful, and some will probably fall in between. I personally take the view that the endeavour, the commercial endeavour, should fit the site, should fit the collection. We would never do anything that put the building at risk or the collection at risk, but frankly, pretty much anything else is, as you can see, up for grabs. The one that you mentioned, Alistair, which was the paranormal evenings and events, was a personal thing for me, so I'm not sure we had an organisational response well sort of shaped. To me, the uncomfortable sort of decision on that one was between our museums and their normal role as a learning place where 50,000 school children a year come and enjoy the experience, family-friendly days, and whether this would then be kind of a jarring thing to put in place in addition to some of those more kind of family-friendly. There has not been, at least to date, complaints or a feeling that it's not a good fit. And as I said, one of the things that's reassured me is they're pretty self-contained, and they do their thing, and as I said, it pays well, which does help you kind of when you're going through the kind of shall we, shan't we decision making. I think I haven't spoken much about kind of partnerships other than sort of mentioning the Aviation Academy and organisations like Norwich University, the arts. My instinct is for museums more generally that a lot of the happy hunting grounds will be in partnership with people. We have partners like History Mystery, but we wouldn't dream of doing weddings all ourselves. We have a very good company that does weddings there. So again, that's part of the decision-making process.
I think it's important to have a really strong sense of your brand and your vision, your purpose. And I think the museums that do this particularly well really kind of get that. V&A for me is a great example where, they've got a really clear brand, but that's then helped inform their programming, their shop all fits together. And so perhaps that is a way to kind of decide, is it for us or is it not? And actually, if you look at the really successful commercial brands like Disney, they really get what the Disney brand is, and they obviously make an awful lot of money doing that. But you wouldn't ever have anything in Disney that didn't feel Disney, if that makes sense. And I think museums can learn quite a lot from that. And that, for me, is some of the decision making about, do we do it or don't we do it? Does it fit with kind of who we are? And sometimes it's a difficult debate.
I think the critical thing for me was what our priorities were, what we're for, and who our community is. And I think what we were doing is consistent with that. It's enabled us to do things that we would have wanted to do anyway. I would be worried if we started getting drawn away to areas that we wouldn't normally have been in, and starting not doing the things that we think are really valuable. That's always a concern. I had a real agony over the idea of sweating assets, because it's really good for you to run up and down stairs and get sweaty once a day. It's not good if you do it all day, every day, and that sense of burnout, of unsustainability. We've got to be really careful that we're not going beyond what we actually can do. I think there's a whole load of untapped potential that is what we're talking about, and so I actually think we're not actually yet at a sweaty stage, and that's okay. I'm a bit concerned beyond that. But the other bit, and sort of apologies to everybody in the exhibition hall next door, but I also worry about some of the professional costs that have come in and the expectation on museums to have really quite plush appearance. And there's a lot of things we've been doing which actually are really cheap and don't need the huge income to do. And I wouldn't want to slide towards becoming a world that is only possible if you bring in lots of money. I think there's an awful lot of really cheap, pretty grungy stuff that is really, really good. And I wouldn't want to forget that just because it wasn't either costing or bringing in money.
Do you mean in terms of your own programming?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, actually. Do you think that that there are limits on what the public will accept in terms of the kind of commercial activities that they see museums doing and taking part in? Because that's obviously a subject that has been in your minds, or at least the back of your minds, as you've been going through some of this process.
And actually, just leaping, there's one thing that is a concern for us with this Egypt project is the one place in the world that you're not going to see this exhibition is Aberdeen. And that's really problematic. But on the other hand, the university is an international institution. We're not actually a museum for Aberdeen. It's a more complicated relationship. So I think that's been possible. But at the same time, I am worrying about that. I've been trying to do things that have benefited locally. So that's just one we point about as our international working. That again, does it take you away from who you're for?
I think your question about what will the public accept, I think we have to better explain why we need to do it. You know, if we do go down the route of asking visitors to give a donation, we need to articulate why we need it. And I think people get, you know, if you explain it in the right way, people will get it. I think also, you know, the point that some commercial activity can bring in completely new audiences. I mean, you know, we have people coming in to use our cafe who are really just in the park, or they're tourists lolling around Greenwich who perhaps aren't traditional museum visitors. And I think sometimes some of the commercial activity, whether it be, you know, corporate event, or for example, we run a theatre at Cutty Sark, they're completely different audiences than we otherwise have. So it can be a really positive thing.
Steve, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I think visitors do come with an expectation of a museum of whatever kind and size that is perhaps different than an out-and-out commercial attraction or a retail kind of outlet in a shopping centre. And again, I think it is beholden on us to try and strike that balance. But, you know, frankly, if there's a museum visitor in the UK today who isn't aware that museums are under financial pressure and that they are surprised when they see a wedding going on, because why would you do that? I would be surprised. But trying to strike that balance and also trying to take people with you in that journey and engage them and make them part of the kind of the absolutely putting the pound in the donation box, or you know, making that purchase in the shop, because not only is it a nice souvenir, but it clearly goes to support the education work and the learning programs and the work with, you know, in the community in terms of social access. So it's again, a communication thing, I think, is one of the main focuses.
In the interests of time, I'm going to open up to the floor for questions. We have microphone 1 and microphone 2 over here, and rather than it coming to you, I'm afraid you have to come to it. So if you can start at least thinking up your questions and be brave and come down to the front to ask them, then that would be fantastic. I see you're all... yes, we have one over here. If other people have questions that they want to ask, then, you know, as you can see, it takes a while to get to the microphone. So so do come and queue up.
Victoria Perry, I'd like to pick up Steve's point about losing the boxes around different sorts of audiences, because you've all touched on that. And I think it's pretty fundamental, because I think a lot of museums are still thinking about income generation shops as bolt-on, not part of the museum, but they're fundamental. And I'd actually question that visitors are actually bothered. Actually, a good experience includes food, drink, shopping, good loos, and plus the others. But can you talk more about this losing the boxes, and perhaps ponder on what does that mean for the funders who want to fund audience development?
Right. Thank you. The older I get, the more blurred the lines are, and that may just be because in previous places I've worked, Ironbridge and other independent museums, we've kind of embarked upon a path sometimes and then found it's had a much broader approach. There is no doubt in my mind that one of the best ways we can diversify our audiences for Norwich Castle is by having lots of weddings, because a lot of you, if you're there for a wedding, you kind of have to be because of the connected family-wise or friend-wise, and I think that is getting people over the threshold. It's also making Norwich Castle, Gresson Hall, Elizabethan House a special place, and we hope that will be a special place for a very long time. You may come back on anniversaries, you may bring in due course children, other family members. I think it's incredibly porous. The Aviation Academy link is one where, again, we've certainly had a very porous relationship in terms of skills development and the broader kind of approach to supporting young people into jobs and life chances. So very few of the things that I cantered through are a one-trick pony. They're all multifaceted, where if you play them well and position them well, they can be a great way of moving between audience development, learning, access, etc.
Yeah, your 20,000 people coming to your weddings every year must be adding to your visitor figures quite a bit.
It's a very happy addition to the visitor numbers. A small number purchase drinks in the cafe before the wedding. It is a very, lucrative in lots of ways kind of thing to be doing. Hard work, but lucrative.
I think there's lots we can learn from our sort of related sectors. A great example, I took my kids to a reenactment of 1066 down in Battle run by English Heritage over quite recently. It was the most amazing experience. I mean, thousands of families there, all these lots of boys, I have to say, I've got boys, all dressed up with items to whack each other with, lots of swords, and there we were watching this reenactment and all the kids having a chance to have their own battles, kind of really bringing history to life. But equally, there were thousands and thousands of people there, all who've paid to go, and it wasn't necessarily that cheap a thing to do. Lots of people signing up to do membership. So I think that's a great example of where you can bring together an amazing kind of learning outcome. My kids learned lots about history that day, but also something that can actually be fantastic from an income point of view. And I don't think they have to be, I think, as I said in my talk, I think the two things work together is amazing. It's just really, really great.
I suppose my only concern is almost throws things a bit, I'm completely, with the idea of blurring boundaries and mushiness and so on, that's where I am. I don't see the different categories in that way, but I think on the other hand, monitoring afterwards, you use different categories to see who's coming, and I'd just be a wee bit concerned that sometimes, we're talking about the people who pay, the people who have weddings that can be in a historic setting rather than local registry office or whatever, that we could find ourselves becoming, that it just feels more like that wealthy place that therefore becomes more exclusive. And I think we've got to be really careful, but it's almost more a matter of afterwards looking at the effect of this to make sure that we're not building a new exclusion.
Can I just add, I don't think this is ever about dumbing down or losing the curatorial excellence that we all hold dear. And I would say, again, in many of the things we do, we apply the same kind of curatorial rigour to something like a wedding or a curatorial or a commercial outcome. The keep development at Norwich Castle will be, we hope, popular. It will generate income, without a doubt. We have an academic steering group drawn of the best people we can get from universities and English Heritage, etc., so we can give it that kind of rigour. So again, I think there's sometimes an assumption when you kind of going down a commercial route that you're somehow giving up something which is important. And I don't think you necessarily have to think about that at all.
So your ghosts are real ghosts.
It's interesting. The paranormal, I don't know what they get out of it. but they must. We've never said we've got ghosts. That's the thing. You see. That would be where I would say we've got a beautiful old building that's obviously seen a lot of life. They they get out of it what they want. And I guess another thing, kind of approaching it from a sort of it's on your terms kind of approach.
I mean, you said then about these university academics being that, providing that expertise. Yes. I mean, watch out, we will be charging. And that's the world that the universities are getting into, is we will charge for anything. Sweat our assets.
Are there any other questions? We've just got a couple more minutes. Yeah, we've got one over here, definitely. We've got one over here. So if you both want to come to your microphones, we'll take the questions together, I think, because we've only got 3 or 4 minutes.
I guess it follows on from what you were saying about we'll charge for what we have. And Steve, you said about the construction company that took the design for their building. For a long time, we're looking at bringing artists in and sharing the designs and sharing our collections with our community. So what sort of discussion was had on how much you charge and where the line is between sharing with artists and sharing in a commercial way, and how you charge for that?
And then we'll also take the question 2 over here.
Hi, I'm Jane Austen. In order to be more enterprising, we often have to be more risk-taking. And my question is that more challenging when you're working within a local authority context?
Right. Who wants to start?
Well, I'm happy to say something about working in local authority context. I've worked in independence, little international, and a local authority context on 2 occasions. I don't see any difference, really. I've never bought the sort of, you can't do it because you work in a local authority context. I think you have to get elected members on board. I think you have to work within the structures that you've got, but frankly, we're not precluded from doing anything at Norfolk Museum Service that I think we could have done equally well in an independent setting.
I mean, I can't speak about local authority, but as I mentioned, I came from a commercial background. This is my first time working in the public sector, and I think probably that risk-taking attitude is one of the biggest differences I've noticed. If we spotted an opportunity in my past life, we'd go for it, and we go for it quickly, maybe the next week, or however quickly we can make it happen. And I find there's a lot more needing to write papers, and the speed of making decisions is much slower. There's much less of an appetite to just try things and take risks. And I think we do miss out by not being a little bit bolder. And part of being more of a cultural entrepreneur, I think, is being prepared to take some of those risks and accepting that sometimes things will fail. But, the great entrepreneurs who've built amazing businesses, they do take risks and they do accept some failures along the way.
I think that's where we've been really fortunate. I mean, partly I think because we are so below the radar that nobody actually cares. But the opportunities have sort of flown by, and you're deciding which ones you grab, and you've got to do it really quickly. I mean, this whole exhibition, it was a really snap decision that I had to take really quickly, whether I was interested or not, and we went for it. But I think the lack, in a sense, the focus in the university on teaching as in student fees, research as in research grants, anything else they're not really very interested in. So you can do it, and if it brings a benefit, great.
I'd just like to respond to the question about pricing. There are many things in our world, in Norfolk Museum Service, for which we will never charge. Schools will never pay to come in. We don't charge students for research, and I hope, as long as I'm there, we will never be in that situation. In terms of some of the other pricing, because you're doing things like, working with the firm of architects on the balconies, you are making it up as you go along, and I think that's okay because it's part of learning. And when you've done that, you could think, oh, actually, they paid that a bit quickly. We could have had, we could have done it for a bit more. Also, conversely, you can find the sort of point of when people are prepared to pay. So I think that's quite good fun. And actually, frankly, not a problem at all to be a bit flexible and to kind of have a process where but you do learn. It's an iterative process.
I mean, that's been my concern of my own naivety, that I think I could have screwed more money out of it.
In other circumstances, indeed. Our hour is up. Hopefully you've all learned a lot and are leaving with a bit of inspiration for your own museum. So thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.